Implicit in what we've said so far is that strategic do not move sequentially. Strategic thinking does not move sequentially. It jumps around. A bunch of what Amy just showed you suggests you need to iterate. You need to do multiple tries, learn a little, try a little, learn a little, try a little. So we're going to go back to the beginning. Pick a new partner. Share your strategic question now. I'm going to guess it's already different than when you walked in the door. Share it now and do it in the format. And we're going to write a couple up on the board and talk about how to frame them and what might have changed about them over the course of just an hour and 40 minutes. So find a new friend that you haven't shared with yet. Your challenge is just the strategic question without the background. Just the strategic question, 60 seconds. You ready? Mark? Set? Go!
And just like that, they're alive.
Do you want to write?
Yeah, so he's okay.
All right, come on back, and we're going to throw a couple on the wall.
The thing is that a lot of them got coffee.
I love you people. I love this. You guys are you're on fire. You are in Waggle. All right, come on back. Come on back, my friends. Come on back. Come on back. Come on back. I'm so excited because we were hoping that this is what would happen. I know you need more time, and we have like another hour to go, so we got plenty of time. We're gonna throw some examples up on the wall. We're gonna throw some examples on the wall, and this is gonna help your thinking. Come on back. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for confirming. Thank you for confirming our assumption that you wanted to talk some more about strategic questions. I just want to point out there's some real strategic thinkers in this room that we know about, and we were talking about some of the folks that we know in the room who already are onto some really hot, exciting, difficult strategic questions. Michelle right here, we're working with her in Washington, and she's written like a 30-page business analysis, which is essentially a 30-page version of her strategic question about how do we really do family engagement across the agency and not just have a person who has that as their title. Super exciting, and I'm getting off my neck just saying that. So talk to her if you want to learn about that one. We're working with Louisiana, and I know that you guys have been working on sort of what the strategic questions are. I shared the Kentucky strategic questions with you. Lacey's an old friend who's a very strategic thinker and who used to be at AMCHP and now is in Washington. Do you want to share?
We're actually in the process of developing our strategic questions and figuring out what we want to put our efforts towards.
Do you want to share one of those right now? Do you want us to throw it on the wall?
Well, actually, one of them is related to how do we include families.
How do we implement family engagement across the Bureau of Family Health? How do we implement family engagement across the Bureau of Family Health?
I mean, that's pretty close to yours, isn't it? Do we know the answer to that? There's 100 answers to that, right? So it is a question. It is a question because there's 100 answers. Is it big? It's big. What's your sense of the consequences of not answering it? It would be status quo, and is status quo acceptable?
No, that's going backwards.
Status quo is going backwards. You're freaking me out. If we stay where we are and the world changes, then we're behind. The future travelers, the time travelers will say they're still doing that same thing. Anything else you want to tag on that particular strategic question? Do other people have questions about whether or not that's strategic or how to test if that's strategic?
If you don't do it, you're providing a service that might not be really helpful to the folks you're providing it to.
That sounds pretty dire. That sounds pretty dire. Inefficiency, ineffectiveness, we're providing a service that's not actually needed by the people we say we're serving. Okay, that would be awful. Does that make sense? Here's a further test. It's not on this worksheet, but here's a further test of a strategic question to help you feel confident that it is strategic and that it's framed properly. And this is how it goes. If that were, let's just, in the middle of your strategic planning process, let's just say that was our strategic question. What kind of answers would we get? What sorts of activities, what sorts of strategies would emerge if we framed it, how do we implement family engagement across the Bureau? What kind of work would we wind up doing? Is that work different than what we're doing now? So that would be a little test. You wind up doing different kinds of work if you framed it like that. Do you guys have a sense of what some of those might be? Like big, broad brush, what sort of work would you do to answer that?
Go ahead.
If you legitimately engage families or co-produce the system with us as families, rather than a cycle of fixing something that's broken all the time, you would create a system that works from the beginning if you're legitimately engaging, not just but co-producing it with them.
Yeah, so did you get a picture in your head of what might look radically different from what we're doing now? There would be, for one thing, there would be a different kind of meeting happening where family members were in at the outset. There might be some of the design thinking kinds of work happening that Amy was referencing right before the break. So you might be sending anthropologists out to watch, to the family, to just watch and see. Exactly.
I have a question. So is this question actually broad enough to get at what they're really trying to achieve? Should it be instead something bigger? Is family engagement a possible implementation solution? Or is it how do we ensure that family perspectives are prioritized in how we do our work? Instead of doing family engagement, right? Maybe, I'm not even sure co-creating with families falls under that. So I'm just asking it as a question.
I think,
Amy's got it. Amy's putting it on the wall.
I guess I had a thought as soon as you said that, it means that that would be a different answer, different set of answers, because the services may not even be the same in that case, so.
So a big thing that comes to me is you have to have buy-in because it means reallocation of how you prioritize your funding resources.
Yeah, and that gives you an indication, ooh, this is big enough, high enough level. If there are answers to what you think is your strategic question that don't require you to get leadership buy-in, it might not be strategic yet. Because this is talking about changing the structure. It's talking about transformation. When we dug into yours right away, we got to get Lacey on the phone. You want to try another one? Who's got one they want to throw on the wall and we'll poke at it? Hooray.
How can all prenatal women in Chesapeake, Virginia have access to home visiting services?
I said, do they all need it?
Do they all need it? Why?
So do I need to define that? The goal, one of our big programs is prenatally is to decrease preterm labor. So that's kind of our big goal, and then also just to mitigate a lot of the risks and things to get those services in place.
Already a different question is emerging.
Very interesting. So sometimes when you're stuck and you're not sure if your question's broad enough, you play the game of root causes. Why? Well, that's something altogether different than what we have up there. What up there is framed as a question. So we're asking you to think a little bit, go back a few steps, right? So if the concern is more around, did you say preterm labor? What would the question be instead?
I mean, can it be something as simple as how can we decrease preterm labor in prenatal mothers in Chesapeake, Virginia?
It could be. And it's possible that home visiting might be one of the solutions, but until you do that uncovering perspectives, you don't know, right? So that we just did this exercise just to kind of help everyone understand how to back it up, back it out, make it bigger. Is this a good time to shift? Okay. Great. Thank you all. You can pat yourselves on the back. Well done. As Steve mentioned, this is very much an iterative process. Okay. Whoop. So, can everyone hear me? Okay. So now we're going to shift gears to talking about how do we make room for strategic thinking. Amy referenced earlier the process or activity of using StrengthsFinder to kind of pinpoint who on your teams are already naturally strategic thinkers. Do you already kind of in your minds know who those people might be? The people who ask the kind of annoying questions that I just asked? A little. If you don't feel that you are necessarily one of those people, and that wouldn't come up first if you were to do a StrengthsFinder, for example, that is okay. And we're going to spend the next little bit talking about how thinking strategically is sort of like a state of mind that can happen for anyone. And we're going to talk about some tools and some processes that you can use on an iterative, ongoing basis to help you think strategically as well. Raise your hand if you think that might be helpful. Okay. So imagine if everyone could do extraordinary work and that everyone can be a strategic decision maker and that we all work in environments that cultivate strategic thinking. It is actually possible. There's a lot of tools out there. One that we like to use is one that's been put out by Franklin Covey, authored by Kogan, Merrill, and Reen, called The 5 Choices. So have you heard of the productivity paradox? Raise your hand if in your family currently or in your ancestry, someone has worked in farming or factory work. Great, I had a feeling. So things have changed. Now we're in the technological era, which is wonderful in most aspects, but it's also produced some challenges for us. Raise your hand if you feel sometimes challenged by the amount of technology coming at you every day, whether it's, yeah, I had a feeling. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, right? It's never been easier and harder to feel productive ends of our day, and that's what this productivity paradox is about. And those are the things that get in the way of us thinking strategically. So we're going to talk about them a little bit. This thing is very high tech. So I'm curious, take a moment. There's some plain sheets of paper on your table that I'm going to ask you to use throughout this little mini session today. Write down for a moment for me one thing that you love about your work. I'm going to give you a few seconds. Get my water bottle. I think it's that one. Yeah, it's that one. Thanks. Yeah, sure. Raise your hand if you've written yours down already. Great. This should be easy, right? There's lots of things we love about our work. Would you mind sharing?
The variety.
Nice. Very good. Anyone else? Still writing?
The opportunity to successfully affect change.
I love it. Wonderful. How about back here? What do you love about your jobs?
My peeps, I love my peeps.
She loves her people. I love it. You too. I see that. Yes. She's your peep. Yeah.
The very thing I needed as a young mom of a deaf child, I can now give to other parents.
Oh, Oh, thank you for doing that. That's wonderful. How about over here? Anything different that you love about your jobs?
Just improving the lives of the community.
How about you?
I like testing new ideas.
She likes testing new ideas. She's in the right room. Very good. How about you all? What do you love?
Opportunity to be able to make changes.
The opportunity to make changes. Excellent. I'm going to try to hit every table if I can. How about you all? Anything? Feeling shy? I'm going to pick on you. You were my first. She was our first guinea pig this morning.
I just said the ability to help newborns and their families.
Right. To help out newborns and their families. Excellent. How about over here? What do you love? What do you go to work for every day?
I love everything about my job.
She's her supervisor.
Really and truly, I have a serious passion for helping families similar to mine.
That's fantastic. I love it. And how about this table? Anybody?
How about if I say it gets me out of the house and away from my husband?
A little bit, but that's okay. That's all right. We are a group of empathy.
I just like the enormity of the challenge to be able to make change.
He likes the enormity of the challenge. You picked the right field in public health. Perfect. So you see these items up here: proactive work, high impact goals, creative thinking, planning, prevention, relationship building, learning, and renewal. I bet everything you wrote down fits into one of those buckets, right? That's why we're here. That's what we love to do. That's what we call the good stuff. And so we're going to talk about today how we can make room in our crazy lives to do more of this, the stuff that you love, okay? So, with children, there are no bad children. We know this in maternal child health, right? But children sometimes make bad choices. And when they have to write apology notes for things that they've done wrong, they don't say, "I'm sorry for being bad." They say, "I'm sorry for making a bad choice." So if we think about the work that we do, our time, our work, our efforts, our tasks, and we reframe that as choices, that's a whole different ballgame than how we're typically approaching our work, right? So we're going to talk today about choices. And the 5 that this book kind of goes over that we're going to talk about today is: first, act on the important; second, go for extraordinary; third, schedule the big rocks; 4, rule your technology; and lastly, fuel your fire. So first, important but not overacting on the urgency. How many of you feel accomplished when you have checked things off your to-do list? Yeah, me too, absolutely. Actually, I use a little program that sends rainbow unicorns across my screen each time I've checked off 3 things off my list, just for a little extra boost, just so you know. That's how much I love to do that, right? That's often how we define success, but we're oftentimes hitting those tasks just at the last minute before the deadline, am I right? Yeah, I know, because we're pulled in so many directions. And that word urgency, do you feel like we use that in our work? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nodding, yeah. So we use it so much, in fact, that it feels like sometimes that everything is urgent. So just trying to tease out the difference between what's really important and what's urgent is part of strategic thinking. So just think about that a little bit. Okay. Go for extraordinary. So I want you to think back to a time when you knew you were doing extraordinary work. Reflect on that part when I asked you what you love about your work and pick something like that. Just take 10 seconds to think about it. This would be a time where maybe you were doing a project that brought out your best, when you felt invested and your whole self was into it. Okay? Any volunteers here? What was your decision-making like when you were working on a project like this? Any volunteers? I'll pick on you if you don't raise your hand. You look like you're ready.
Oh, no.
Tell me, what was your decision-making like?
I was pretty focused and was able to say no to a lot of other things because I wanted it so badly.
I love it. She was focused. That's right. Tell me about the quality of your attention when you were working that felt extraordinary.
Quality of my attention. Well, it was focused, like that young woman said. there was a driven energy about it, and that was energizing.
Driven energy, energizing. I love it. How did you handle distractions when you were working on your extraordinary work?
It's easier when you're that focused to handle distractions and to put up the walls and say, no, I need to focus on this, on when you're working in other projects.
And what strategies did you use? Did you put a sign on your door? Did you wear headphones? What worked for you?
Sign on the door first, but yeah, headphones are another strategy. I'll put empty headphones on my head if I need to.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, back here to the peeps. That's what I'm going to call it, your table from now on. How much energy and clarity of mind did you feel when you were doing this work? Anyone? Anyone? I'm going to pick on you. You know I will. All right, I'm coming. Clarity.
I think I struggle with that, and I think when I can work from home or outside of the office, I found a space that gets rid of those distractions, that I find that I'm more creative and more outside my box. But then I think I have challenges coming back and figuring out how to implement them. But I think we have a really good team that helps to say how we play off of each other. So it's taking that step back and almost having that retreat period, whether it's an hour of a retreat or ideally it would be a full day or a couple.
That's a great point. I heard her say having a retreat period. And oftentimes when we work with leaders in leadership development, we have found it to be really helpful to bring them somewhere where nobody can find them and give them that retreat experience. We even make them turn off their phones because that's the only way we can help them get to that strategic place, because a lot of times leaders in public health are putting out fires day in and day out. Thank you all for your contributions on that. So the tale of 2 days, right? Okay, I need a volunteer from the audience. Anyone? I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. I just need somebody. Thank you. Thank you. What's your name?
My name is Carla.
Carla, when did you arrive here in D.C. and where are you from? Oh, you're from Oklahoma.
I arrived here yesterday.
And so when was your last day in the office this week?
I'm confused at the days of the week.
Okay, it's Saturday. I don't know why we're working on a Saturday. It is Saturday, people.
Thursday.
Thursday was her last day in the office. What time did you wake up on Thursday?
5:30.
Oh, God love her. She woke up at 5:30. Morning like at home before you left?
I was going to be on time, but I figured out there's a lot of other things I could do, so I was late getting to work.
Were you taking care of other people that morning?
Yes.
Were you trying to get your hair done and get your clothes looking nice and getting all that ready?
I wanted to make sure I had everything in the suitcase, yes.
Right, okay, very good. And then what was your morning like on Thursday once you finally got there?
It was pretty okay. Trying to prepare to leave, make sure that everyone knows who's going to be covering when I'm out, making sure that I did some last minute things that I had to get done before I left.
Tying up loose ends? Yes. I did the exact same thing.
It's not going to be what I need to do along with what I should have done before I left.
And where did you eat your lunch?
At my desk.
She ate at her desk. That sound familiar? Okay. And then what time you were trying to get out on Thursday knowing you're going to be working all weekend?
I wanted to get out at my regular scheduled time at 4 o'clock, but I didn't. I got out at 6:30.
What happened?
I tried to take care of all the distractions along with whatever the other things I needed to do, so that's what happened.
I feel your pain. And how long did it take you to get home?
Probably about 20 minutes.
When did you actually pack for this trip?
Wednesday, I started packing.
Schedule. Gold star. Gold star. And what time did you go to bed after that 5:30 wake up on Thursday?
Oh, I went to bed probably about, I would say 10 o'clock, but then I got a call about 11:30 because I have a college student that had to talk to her mom about a situation that she had occurred that day, just helping her with the adult life. And so I had to listen to her, and so I didn't fall back to sleep till probably about 1:30 and had to get up to be at the airport at 5. And needless to say, I didn't get there on time, so I got there probably maybe 40 minutes before the plane was to leave, and I got in the line behind a lady that had a stroller and a baby when I was going through the TSA. And so therefore, I was really, really, really struggling and hustling trying to get to the terminal. But I'm here.
Okay, so that was a extraordinarily busy, typical day, right, in our lives. I'm sure a lot of you related a lot of the things she just told us about. So how do we get to to those extraordinary days where we're doing the work that you all wrote down at the beginning? So any of you who are parents, especially you, because you can explain to us how to do this. I was going to say, especially for those of us with teenagers, we probably think about this a lot because we're doing a lot of coaching on using your thinking brain rather than your reactive brain, right? So our thinking brain is where we are making conscious, intentional decisions, where we're using those executive functioning skills like organizing, prioritizing, communicating clearly, and we are also using, I can't read this is so small, the ability to consciously override that's the part of our brain that lets us know, hey, wait a minute, I want to react this way, but I'm going to take a minute, make a different choice, and go this direction, right? And then there's the reactive part of our brain that keeps us in that fight or flight place that a lot of us feel on those typical days when we're running from one thing to the next. The good part of our reactive brain is that it does help us process our feelings and emotions, but it also, and I think this will make sense to a lot of you, we use our reactive brains a lot when we're super, super busy, and we fall back into sort of habitual behaviors, right? Maybe they're from childhood, maybe they're from years of doing a certain task a certain way, but the reactive brain works. And think about the leaders that you work with, maybe your managers, maybe a past one. How many of you prefer to work for leaders that are are using their thinking brains a little bit more than their reactive brains, right? Most of us typically enjoy that style of management a little bit more, and a lot of you have leadership roles, so we want to be thoughtful about that as well. To go for extraordinary, we really have to think about how we can take a step back and do this process of taking a pause, clarifying by asking questions, getting input, uncovering perspectives like Amy discussed, kind of like honing your skills around mindfulness, right? The third one is schedule the big rocks. There's a time management expert named Laura Vanderkam, and she has a great TED Talk out there you might be interested in. And she talks about the concept that time is really a choice. And she added up how many hours we typically spend at work, commuting, and sleeping. And she says after all of that, we have about 72 hours a week to work with to figure out how we want to, spend our times to have an extraordinary impact outside of even our jobs. In order to make room for strategic thinking, we have to shift our thinking to decide what's most important. Going back to that concept of it's a choice. We have to decide what's most important. I'm seeing some head nodding, so I'm glad that this is resonating. The whole concept is to take time to actually schedule what those big rocks are. For some of us, that's a Friday, afternoon where we have a little bit less meetings perhaps. Maybe for our volunteer in the back, it's doing that when you have some time to work from home, however it works for you. But the concept is look at your calendar and schedule ahead blocks of time to do this kind of strategic thinking and extraordinary work. It's kind of like the concept financially of pay yourself first, where you kind of pay into your savings account before you pay your bills. It's kind of that investment into yourself around time similarly. Strategic decision makers focus attention and energy on these priorities, and they don't spend their time down here in the gravel. Number 4, I know you get this one. Rule your technology, don't let it rule you. This is a hard one, and it's going to be a constant struggle. How many of you respond to email as it comes to you? Good, okay. Now, how many of you do that, but not all the time, but some of the time? Do it. We all do that, right? Taking it one at a time, kind of like an assembly line. Experts say to be a strategic thinker, you have to first quiet your brain and then tune into that thinking part of your brain. And so if you're constantly accepting those distractions and not just setting aside time per day to respond to emails, you're going to have a harder time with that. So once we know what's most important, which is the hard part, figuring out what that is, we can set criteria to help us guide our decisions about where we spend our time, our energy, and our attention. The last one is fuel your fire. When we feel overwhelmed, we oftentimes feel that it's more challenging to make decisions. Would you agree with that? Yes, I feel that way a lot of the time. So how can we cultivate a state of mind that helps us listen to our inner voice that's telling us what's really important? The questions to ask yourself all the time about this, and I encourage you to ask your teams this, and I'm going to say them slow in case you want to write them down. Is this important? Is this aligned to my most important role and goals? Do I have the most important things scheduled for the week ahead, month ahead? And am I controlling distractions? Have you ever been invited to participate in a group that already exists, a work group, right? Have you ever gone into that group and you kind of look at it and you go, I see that things are moving, I think that things are going in a certain way, but have they lost sight of what the whole point was to begin with, right? Do you ask that question, is this important? What our desired goals are? I'm that annoying person, so you have to be thoughtful about what groups you want to invite me to, because I will ask challenging questions. Steve is smiling over there. And so people like that can be a little bit annoying, but the hope is that you can kind of shift things to get things on track, right? So this concept of extraordinary, productive people consistently recharge. So I try to have a mental model of this in my mind when I'm starting to feel like my life is getting a little out of control. And I worked for a C-level executive. It was a really unique experience. And I watched how, she structured her life. She was incredibly productive, incredibly strategic. Everyone loved working for her, and she affected a whole lot of change. And I noticed that she went to the pool every morning before she came to work. She came to work around 9 or 9:30, and she left usually by around 5:30, and she had a family. She kind of could do it all. And I didn't get emails from her very often, very late at night or on the weekends. And I really, really reflect on that experience a lot when things start feeling to get hairy. And I'm like, well, if she could do that, why can't I do that too, right? But I noticed what she did is she really had strategies for eliminating distractions, and she was very specific about where she was going time and energy on her day-to-day work. So think in your lives, do you have someone that you could think of that's doing that well, and how can you take some of those strategies? Okay, so this is a fun activity. This is called, I call it roles mapping. I want you to take a blank sheet of paper from the center of your table, and I want you to draw a circle, okay? Draw a circle. Am I doing okay on time? I'm gonna need a good 7 minutes. I think we'll be okay. I don't know about communication, but we're okay at least for this. Sorry if I'm taking too long. Okay, everyone has a circle. Now I want you to think about your whole life, and I want you to make a pie chart. Yeah, your actual life, and I want work to be just one category, okay? Work is one category, and then the other parts of your life. You can define it how you want. Family, elder care, parenting, church activities, community volunteering, exiting my puppy, whatever it is for you. I'm going to give you like 30 seconds. Make sure you've given the right slice of pie. It's just slices of pie. You can go home later and redo this activity, but I want you to understand how to do it, because I want you to go home and teach others how to do it. Wonderful. Now I want you to draw another circle. Same size, biggish. Now I want you to think about your actual job and all the hats you wear at your job. And I want you to do the same thing for each role that you play. Okay? Ivy needs 3 sheets of paper. You're welcome to the flip chart paper if you need it. We're going to have an intervention for you after. Great job. This is the last time. I want you to draw one more circle. Now I want you to think of your department or your agency or your organization, and I want you to think about what role it plays. What role it plays, the roles of your department, your agency, your organization. Roles. Are you the special health care needs? Are you the administrators of the home visiting program? Okay, you get the sense of what I'm going for here. I want you to go back to the middle circle, the one about your roles at your job. That's the only one we're going to look at from here on out. I want you to look at each segment of your circle and give yourself a grade. E for extraordinary, areas where you know you're doing extraordinary work. O for ordinary, where you think you may be achieving ordinary things. And U for underperforming. Okay, E for extraordinary, O for ordinary, U for underperform. No one's going to look at it, and I'm not going to make you talk about it. Now I want you to take a look at it, and I want you to pat yourself on the back every time you see an E, and take the time, if you go back home to do this with your teams, to celebrate the areas where you're doing extraordinary things. We need to do a better job of that in general. And then I want you to kind of take a moment to assess and look courageously at any areas where you think you could improve upon or where things may be lacking. And then when you go home, I want you to do some validation work and ask others for input, because this was a very subjective exercise, right? Now, can you see the utility of doing this with a team back at home? And we just did this from kind of like you can do it from an ideal perspective, and then you could do the exercise again in terms of actual, and you could do a comparison. And this will help frame getting people into a thinking place. It helps get you thinking about it, okay? That's a tool to use when you go back. Oh, I'm sorry, my shadows. So the next thing I want you to do is to look at one of those segments in your roles pie chart of your job or position, okay? And I want you to practice writing one role statement. So, for example, as course director for the North Carolina, Leadership Institute, Public Health Leadership Institute, I will help leaders across the state develop more effective communication strategies about their own work. I will do this by, this is not a time, this is a how. I will do this by linking them to helpful resources, tools, and through some coaching. That's how I'm going to get to that extraordinary outcome of helping leaders communicate their work more effectively. That's an example. I want you to think about just doing one role statement for one role that you have at work. Does anyone want to share? I said I wouldn't make you, but would anyone like to? No volunteers? I have candy. Oh, I've got one in the back. Give me the candy. Okay, it's getting to that time of the day where we're getting hungry. I've got treats. I'd love to hear an example of a great role statement to help us get to extraordinary work.
As executive director, I will help staff develop their own opportunity for creative, critical thinking time in their schedules.
And how will you do that?
I have no idea.
Good enough. Thank you so much. Can I have another volunteer? Yes.
As an executive director, I will foster a more positive culture in the workplace. I will do this by increasing communication and actively engaging personnel.
Nice. Have a pick. I've got tons of candy. Come on. Role statements? This is how you get to be in that place of a strategic thinker if it doesn't come naturally for you. I want you to get really comfortable doing this. Did you raise your hand? Thank you for trying.
So I think part of my job is as overstaff as being kind of a diplomat. I don't know if other people feel that way. Part of my pie is diplomat. So put as a diplomat in my program, I will facilitate better communication among staff by going through the crucial conversations class together.
That's a great class, whichever you want. Now, I haven't been picking on the people not at tables, so any volunteers? Yes, you don't mind? Thank you.
As the home visiting section chief, I will ensure that family perspectives are a part of our home visiting work by inviting clients to participate in our monthly advisory committee meetings.
That sounds fantastic. And the middle part, how would we define that as an extraordinary outcome? That middle, what was the second part you said? As blah, 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 I will.
The family perspectives are part of our home visiting work.
You're going to ensure that.
Right. And how is that extraordinary?
It is extraordinary because it's hard to do. It's hard to do. Wonderful. Okay, so I can see that that was slightly painful, which is exactly how I like it. Yes, because the more that you engage with these statements and feel excited by them, and you tweak them and you make them real, that's what's going to help your brains have clarity about strategic thinking. And it's going to establish anchors that you're going to need to help you make the right decisions. So doing this painful exercise won't feel so painful once you get using it more and more. This back at home with your teams on a regular basis, not just a one-time thing, okay? So we've been talking a lot about individuals and strategic thinking, and now we're going to talk a little bit about teams. Okay? So how can you help your team get to that good stuff that we talked about at the beginning? It's important, obviously, to allow for some time for strategic pauses, and I was really encouraged just hearing the role statements from a couple of executive directors who are already thinking about how they're going to do that, and creating a safe space for people to have, on things and have these sort of conversations. So some of the questions that you can ask teams to get them in this way of thinking is, why are we doing this? How does this contribute to our desired results? Is this a distraction from higher priorities? And should we be doing this at all? Again, I'm that annoying person in the meeting that actually asks these questions. If you don't have one on your team, then it should be you. Okay, I'm going to read them again. Why are we doing this? Have you ever been in a meeting where you're kind of wondering that? What's the point, right? Hired results. Is it a distraction from higher priorities? And should we be doing it at all? Okay? So true or false, do our decisions affect the people and the communities we serve? True? Raise your hand. Yeah, right? The decisions we make reflect our values? True, right? And our decisions are set as an example for those that we lead? I think so. And not deciding is a decision too. So strategic thinking is important for strategic decision making. And these are around strategic decision making. And as our field, I heard a lot of you talk today about how you're really making a lot of effort to reach across the aisle, if you will, to work with multi-sector partners to get your MCH work moving forward, right? And as we're starting to do that, we know that, the resources, the policies, the delivery systems are changing. And as we start to work with different partners that speak a little differently than us, think of things in different ways, we need to become increasingly transparent about our decision making and how we do that. So I was relating to your story yesterday about how you got here. So yesterday I had an adventure. I went to the airport in the morning thinking I was going to be on a 40-minute flight. Well, we all got on the plane on time. It was looking good. And then the pilot came on and said, unfortunately, something was wrong with the sensors that tell us if the brakes are getting too hot or not. And there was going to need to be a replacement part, but they couldn't find one. It wasn't at our airport, and they were going to have to fly one in from somewhere else, but they couldn't find one. So we all had to get off the plane. They told us it'd probably be at least a 3-hour delay, but they really had absolutely no idea. So what did I do? Well, that's right. I started thinking about other strategies, right? I knew somebody who was driving, and I thought, okay, I better let that person know that right now I'm grounded. And I started thinking about what was my trade-off going to be if I did that, right? I was going to miss an afternoon meeting that I had been looking forward to attending. And then I thought about, well, what if I changed airlines? What are the other flights, right? But they weren't rebooking people yet. So I knew I had to kind of time that just right. Because when they make the announcement, everybody rushes and then they run out. And I knew that was going to happen. So I was just watching carefully. I was waiting for more information to see how long it was going to take, what the delay was really going to be. So I waited it out a little bit. And then when I noticed that he started rebooking a few people quietly, then I snuck into the line and I got myself rebooked because I realized that the next flight that was going to be with that airline out of my airport was going to be the exact same plane. It just flies back and forth all day to DC. I did a lot of listening. I did a lot of that, ethnography listening that Amy was referring to earlier with design thinking. And so I basically went through this whole process that you all go through every single day when you make hundreds and hundreds of decisions on a daily basis, right? I was going to be the decision maker about how I got here. I had to gather a lot of different information to figure out what my abilities, what the strengths and weaknesses of each were. I evaluated them, and I finally made a decision, and I followed through with it. And miraculously, I did arrive here, which was great. So I just tell you that as an example to explain the decision-making process, because it's a lot more fun to think about it in real terms, I think. You all face a lot of big decisions all the time. I call them decision challenges. So when I talk about that, that's what I'm referring to. Sometimes breaking it down into elements is really helpful. And I just want to refer you to your handout that says decision-making elements. If you want to take a quick look at that. So that's a quick list. It's like a cheat sheet, if you will, that you can use when you go back home. We're going to do an activity in a few minutes that will actually bring it to life a little bit. So I just wanted to give you a couple of options. But as you can see, using the airline example, anytime you have a big decision to make, you want to identify what the problem was. The problem was my plane wasn't working, it was broken. My objective was to get here in time for a meeting. My alternatives were to drive with someone or to rebook to another airline or to wait it out and see what would happen. My trade maybe I was going to potentially miss my meeting and I was going to have to spend the whole day at the airport, and that's not a lot of fun. There was a great deal of uncertainty for a certain period of time, and then the uncertainty diminished after I learned more information. And all the while, I was trying to kind of figure out how comfortable I was with taking a risk. I got a little nervous that my ride was going to leave before I was going to have enough information to make an educated decision, right? And you can see how all the little decisions are all linked together to make the big one. So where is strategy in all of this? Is that what you're wondering? Yeah. So just being able to identify which decisions are strategic is helpful. Another handout, if you don't mind pulling that out, that talks about the different types of decisions. It says strategic, here's a little table. The middle one says operational, and the third one says administrative, okay? So just understanding that is helpful. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. To do this, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to tell me if you think it's a strategic question, an operational, or an administrative, okay? Which software program should we choose to improve project management at our organization? Software program should we choose? If you think it's strategic, raise your hand. If you think it's operational, raise your hand. If you think it's administrative, raise your hand. Those of you who rose your hand for operational, you are correct. Those of you who rose your hand for strategic are just too smart and you were overthinking it. Okay, the next one is, when should I submit a report to stakeholders? Is that strategic? Raise your hand. Yeah, it can be, right? Operational or administrative? Ding, 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 you're right. I was aiming for compelling case for why that would be strategic. I would hear you out. Okay, what content should be used to update the website? Strategic, operational, administrative? I was thinking administrative. Now, if you were overthinking it and thinking that you were going to put some sort of spin on a story and it was going to be strategic, you could make a case for that as well. But I was just trying to think of like a task that's done on a regular basis. Okay? How can we integrate the message that brain development from ages 0 to 3 is essential? Is that a strategic question? Is that an operational? Creative. You were all right. It was strategic. Very good, very good, very good. Okay. How can we improve our tracking of level of effort on various projects? Is that strategic, operational, administrative? It was operational. Very good, very good. And lastly, which consultant should we recommend? Strategic, operational, administrative? That was a trick question. You need more information to answer that one correctly. Okay, but you get what I'm saying. Figuring out who makes decisions is important. Sometimes it's an individual, sometimes it's a group, sometimes you vote. Amy talked a lot about uncovering perspectives earlier. So deciding with input is really important. And there's lots of ways to do this, as you know, needs assessments, surveys, key informants, stakeholder interviews, the list goes on. Have you ever been asked to give input on a decision and then they went in a different direction? Right? Okay. So especially when you're working across the aisle with multi-sector partners, it's sometimes very helpful to put together a plan for how decisions are being made and what the different roles are for that. So I just wanted to point this out to you. In project management, this is also sometimes called a RACI. But you want to kind of be very transparent about who's going to make the final decision, who you're asking for input from and you're consulting with, who just needs to be informed, kind of a by the way. So just being clear about that is really helpful. And who here, raise your hand if you've heard of a SWOT. Oh, I had a feeling a lot of you would know that, right? How many of you use SWOTs today? Okay, good. How many of you have heard of SOAR? Less. Okay, so SWOTs are starting to be replaced by SOARs, and SOARs keep the strengths and opportunities, but they add in aspirations and results, and they're really great for when you're trying to get people from a present state to a future state for planning. And that's traditionally how SWOTs have been used, right, for planning purposes, but we're going to show you an alternative use of SWOTs right now, and we're going to kind of do a quick demo for you. So what I want you to do is I'll give you a quick overview. Since you know what they are, you know the internal factors of SWOTs. If you're thinking about, say, for example, breastfeeding for minority moms, the internal kind of factors would be things like the availability of lactation consultants, existing peer groups, are they there, are they not? What's the financial support for pumps? Lack of family support, great family support. The external factors would be things like policies, grant opportunities. Threats could be like hospitals are pushing formulas in areas where lots of minority moms are delivering. Maybe employers, the major employers of a community are not, don't have practices that support breastfeeding moms, et cetera. So, So I'm going to give you a vote between two topics, okay? One is a state wants to start an anti-bullying effort and needs to decide how to use a seed grant. Option 2 is a state wants to better link clinical care with home visiting for vulnerable children. That's option 2. Can you raise your hand if you'd like option 1? Okay. Oh, I'm guessing everyone wants option 2 then. Option 2. Okay, great. I would like for you to take a moment, just about 1 minute at your table, to come up with a strategy that you think could work to help improve the connection between home visiting programs and clinical care for vulnerable kids. 1 minute, quick strategy, brainstorm, go. Okay, who has a strategy? Doesn't have to be perfect. Come on. Creating linkages. Here, hold on. Okay, here's a strategy, Amy.
So for home visitors to clinical care, would be closing the loop on referrals from home visiting to the clinic.
Closing referrals?
Between the home visitor referring to the clinical.
Okay. From home visitor to clinic. Closing the referral loop. Thank you, wonderful table, for going first. Do y'all have one? You don't, if you don't, I'll come back. I'll come back. Okay. Okay, this table, do you have a strategy?
couple. I mean, we talked about improving the communication between the home visitors and the clinicians, and then also Medicaid reimbursements for some of the work that's not currently being reimbursed.
I think that's an important one, the Medicaid reimbursement for work that is not currently being reimbursed for. Thank you. Great. Okay, this table? Strategy? Using telemedicine. Would that be like the home visitor, the family to telemedicine? Great. I'm calling you a table. Do you have one?
So we have a family organization in Delaware, so it has an umbrella organization. I don't think we've ever pitched home visiting to them. We rely on our earlier mentioned Bertha 3 system to kind of make those referrals and that connection, so that's something we could do in our state.
Okay. How do we say that quickly? Amy got it.
Just our family partner meeting, like our family voices, hands and voices groups. We have it pitched home visiting to them, so.
Okay. Intentional recruitment, pitching. Outreach, publish, home visiting. Okay. From clinical to, yeah, which is the other direction they were talking about. This table? I'll put you on the spot, sorry. You're the one I could reach.
We were talking about embedding the home visitors in the clinic so that they're at this table together. And they're all talking.
Did you hear that, Amy? Okay, great.
Actually, the other idea there was actually even having the MCOs be the lead on that, because that is a model in many states, and the MCOs being the payer and the QA people, et cetera, having to.
Put MCO lead.
Yeah.
For that. Thank you. We got it. Perfect. Okay. All right.
We talked about a few, but specifically focusing on developmental screening and using that as a linkage to the provider and also sharing those results with the provider and vice versa.
Kind of like a hook. I like it. Did I want to come back to you? Do you have one? Yes? Okay. Embedding home visiting. Into, okay, perfect. So we've got that one twice. Anything here that I missed? That's not up there yet? It's okay. There's no grade.
Selling the value of home visiting to the providers.
Okay, we've got great options. Thank you. These are awesome strategies. We're going to pick 3. Three strategies. This one.
Close the loop on referrals, invest in clinics, and use developmental screening.
Okay, great. Okay, so what we're going to do is demonstrate for you how you can use a SWOT analysis to help you with a big decision when you're trying to choose a strategy. Okay, so you've got a lot of strategies up here. We've prioritized 3. We have limited resources. We're trying to choose which is going to be the way to go. I mean, just imagine, right? And so you're using the SWOT to help you figure out, to do the analysis part. A lot of times when we make decisions, we do that decision making in our heads, like I did with the whole fixation, right? That's how most of our decisions get made. But when you're doing a decision making process with a group, it's really helpful to use tools that are collective so that you can, you can show your work to each other so that you can do the work with each other and it's something tangible that everyone feels part of. Does that make sense? So it's using a SWOT instead of for future planning to explore different strategies when you're stuck on a decision. Okay, you can use this with your families when you're trying to choose which vacation you want to go on this summer too. Okay, it can be useful in all areas of life. Okay, so Steve is going to be up there and he's going to do the one for closing the loop on referrals from home visiting to clinics. And he would like for 2 volunteers to come and help him that worked on it already. And we're going to try to not break the walls in the room as we do it. Amy is going to work on embed home visiting in clinics using the managed care organizations as the lead, and she would like a couple volunteers from your table to help her do that right now. We only have a few minutes left, so we're going to do this very quickly. And I'm going to work on the one over here on using developmental screening to connect home visiting with clinics, and I believe that was this table. No, this table. Can I have 2 volunteers come help me with this? We're going to take about 3 minutes to do this, just to illustrate it for you so that you can see how you could use this to help your teams make strategic decisions together. Thank you all. Great job. We're going to come back together. I'm in the back of the room in case you're looking for me with Amy. So just to clarify, I've had a couple questions. I know you all are really familiar with SWOT, which is great, but raise your hand if you've typically used planning. I'm expecting most of you to raise your hand. Raise your hand if you've used it to explore different paths you could take when facing a big decision challenge. Nobody does it. So this is an alternative use of using SWOT. Usually everybody does like one SWOT at a table on one topic, and then you do like a group share. This is very different. This is taking separate strategies and doing some analysis together so that then you can do a group share to really synthesize and think about what's going to work best. So I'm going to just real quick back report out for developmental screens. It already exists. Both entities, both home visiting and clinics, are already doing it. They both already see the value, and there's already payment mechanisms in place. The weakness is that there is currently no existing link to share information between the two, so that's something that would have to start ground up. There's also a lack of knowledge of the perspective of each of the two entities with one another, so there's a communication gap. And also, there's no infrastructure in place right now for data sharing. An opportunity, and that's why I love this exercise because it reveals them, is that a learning collaborative across the state is just about to start. Opportunity, not a policy one, not a money one. There's all different types of opportunities, but this is a timing one. So this is a good time to jump into this idea. The threat that's out there is that data sharing has a lot of complexities with it. Potentially, there might be HIPAA problems. Okay, Amy's going to talk about the next one. Oh, it is? We're in sync. That's good. Okay, here's Amy.
Okay, and since I have the microphone, I just want to take advantage of the opportunity to say, note how we did this in less than 15 minutes. You all listed some decisions, right? So you're walking into a meeting. In half an hour, you could split your team up, do this. I mean, you might need an hour, but you get my point. When I think of a SWOT, I'm like, oh, it's all afternoon, right? It doesn't have to be all afternoon to make a decision. It can be really fast. So embed home visitors in clinics. Strengths would be you're working as a team, the clinicians and the home visitors. Your goals are aligned. It's more efficient. It feels better to the patient. Everybody's on the same page. Weaknesses are home visitors and physicians in particular might not feel like they're on the same level or like peers, and there might be challenges there. The family members might not always be present. Conversations about them are happening. Some opportunities that we could use to address those: telehealth, home visitors giving feedback, assessing the risk together, and threats are related to time and money, of course, because that's what threats are always related to.
Yeah, typically.
Interoperability on this chart, which matches what's on your chart, Janine. That was the big weakness and the big threat that we uncovered. So we have the systems. This is the ones about closing the referral loop between home visitors and clinicians. We have systems, we have smart people, so we know the knowledge that wants to get. We have clinical expertise, we have protocols, we have an EMR on the clinical side. But we're struggling with time and capacity to do the communication, and we're really worried about interoperable systems in different languages. So the threat is some HIPAA-related challenge to interoperability. But there's all kinds of opportunities because McVie got refunded. The field of home visiting is really growing, so there's energy there. There's opportunities to do new things. And we have a great partner at Boston Children's that can be the first pilot for whatever we build.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm glad that you all found some utility in that exercise. As we mentioned to you earlier, everything is always iterative, so we ended up swapping out the next section of our presentation, which was on persuasive communication, and we spent additional time trying to figure out what our strategic questions were. We felt that as we listened to you all, that would be more useful, a better use of our time collectively today. I'm sorry we've gone over just a couple of minutes. There are evaluations that we need for you to fill out that are in the center of your table. If you would kindly take a few minutes to fill them out and leave them here with us, we greatly appreciate it. It was a privilege to spend the morning with you all, and we hope you enjoy the conference. Thank you.